It was a Tuesday night in October, and 7-year-old Tommy was supposed to be fast asleep. But sleep wasn't coming easy for the little boy. He lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars formed crooked patterns. He'd stuck up there months ago. The apartment was never really quiet. The walls were thin and he could always hear something. The TV from next door, cars passing by outside, or his mom moving around getting ready for her night shift at the local diner. Tommy's mom had left for work about an hour ago. She always worked the late shift because it paid a little more, and every extra dollar mattered in their small family. Before leaving, she had tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and reminded him that his stepdad Rick was there if he needed anything. But Tommy never really needed anything from Rick. The man had been living with them for almost 2 years, now ever since Tommy was 5, but they never really talked much. The 7-year-old pulled his favorite stuffed dog closer to his chest. It was an old golden retriever toy that his real dad had given him before he moved away. The fur was matted and one ear was slightly torn, but it still smelled like home somehow. Tommy named him Buddy, and Buddy had been through everything with him, moving to this new apartment, starting at a new school, and adjusting to having Rick around all the time. Down the narrow hallway, Tommy could hear the TV playing in Rick's room. It sounded like one of those late-night shows with lots of talking and occasional laughter. Sometimes Rick would call out to Tommy's 12-year-old sister Katie, asking her to bring him something to drink or to help him find the remote control. Katie was always good about helping out. She was the kind of big sister who looked out for Tommy, helped him with homework, and made sure he brushed his teeth before bed when their mom was working. Tonight felt different, though. Tommy couldn't put his finger on what it was, but something in the air felt heavy. Maybe it was because Katie had been quieter than usual during dinner. She barely touched her mac and cheese, which was weird because it was her favorite. When Tommy had asked her if she wanted to watch cartoons with him after dinner, she just shook her head and said she had homework to do. But Tommy noticed she didn't actually have any books out when he peeked into her room later. The apartment building they lived in was old, and everything creaked. Tommy had gotten used to most of the sounds by now. He knew which floorboard squeaked when someone walked down the hallway, and he could tell the difference between their upstairs neighbor's heavy footsteps and the light clicking of their downstairs neighbor's high-heeled shoes. He even knew the sound of the old pipes when someone turned on water anywhere in the building. But tonight there were new sounds coming from Rick's room. At first it just sounded like regular conversation. Rick's deep voice mixed with Katie's higher one. Tommy figured maybe she was just saying goodnight or asking if she could stay up a little later to finish her homework. Katie was responsible like that. She always asked permission for things and never got into trouble at school like some of the other kids. Tommy tried to focus on falling asleep. He counted sheep like his mom had taught him, then tried counting backwards from 100 like his teacher had suggested when he told her he sometimes had trouble sleeping. But the voices from down the hall kept pulling his attention away from his counting. They were getting a little louder, and Katie's voice sounded different. Not angry exactly, but worried maybe. The little boy sat up in his bed and listened more carefully. He could hear Rick saying something, but the words were muffled through the walls. Then Katie said something back, and her voice had that tone that meant she didn't want to do whatever Rick was asking. Tommy knew that tone because Katie used it sometimes when their mom asked her to clean the bathroom or take out the trash when she was busy with other things. Minutes passed, and the conversation continued. Tommy found himself getting more awake, instead of sleepy. Buddy the stuffed dog was getting squeezed tighter in his small arms. The boy's instincts were telling him something wasn't quite right, but he wasn't sure what. He was only 7, and there were lots of grown-up things he didn't understand yet. Then Katie's voice changed completely. It went from that resistant tone to something that made Tommy's stomach feel funny. She sounded scared. Really scared. Not like when she watched horror movies and jumped at the scary parts, but scared in a way that made Tommy want to go check on her. But their mom had always told both kids not to bother Rick when he was in his room with the door closed. The scared tone in Katie's voice got worse. Tommy could hear her saying no several times, and each time she said it, her voice got higher and more panicked. Rick's voice got firmer too, like when adults are trying to make kids do something they don't want to do. But this felt different from when their mom made them eat vegetables or go to bed on time. Tommy slipped out of his bed, his bare feet touching the cold linoleum floor. He tiptoed to his bedroom door, which was slightly open, and peered down the hallway. The light was on in Rick's room and he could see shadows moving around under the door. Katie's voice was getting louder now, and she kept saying things like, "Please don't," and "I want to go back to my room." The 7-year-old felt his heart start beating faster. Something was definitely wrong. Katie never talked like that. She was always calm and collected, even when she was upset about something. This sounded like she was really afraid, and Tommy had never heard his big sister sound afraid of anything before. Then came the sound that changed everything. Katie screamed. Not a little yelp or a surprised shout, but a real scream that sounded like she was in pain or terrified or both. The sound cut through the thin walls of the apartment like a knife, and Tommy felt his whole body go cold. He had never heard his sister make a sound like that before. The scream was followed by more yelling, and Tommy could hear something that sounded like a struggle. Things were being knocked over or moved around roughly. Katie's voice became desperate, crying out words that Tommy couldn't quite make out but that sounded like she was begging for something to stop. Tommy's mind raced. His mom wasn't home. There was no other adult around except Rick, and Rick was the one in the room with Katie. The little boy felt more scared and confused than he had ever felt in his entire 7 years of life. His big sister, who always protected him and took care of him, was in trouble, and he didn't know what to do. Standing there in his pajamas, clutching Buddy the stuffed dog, Tommy remembered something his teacher had told their class just a few weeks ago. She had visited to talk about safety, and she had said that if anyone ever felt like they or someone they loved was in danger, they should call 911. She had made all the kids practice saying their addresses out loud and had explained that the people who answered 911 calls were there to help children, even if they were scared or confused. Katie screamed again, and this time it sounded even worse. Tommy made a decision that would change everything. He ran back to his bed where his mom kept an old phone, the kind with buttons that lit up when you pressed them. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it, but he managed to dial the 3 numbers that his teacher had made them all memorize. 911. Tommy's fingers trembled as he pressed the numbers 911 on the old phone. The buttons made tiny beeping sounds that seemed incredibly loud in his quiet bedroom. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears, almost drowning out the terrible sound still coming from down the hallway. Katie had stopped screaming, but now he could hear her crying, and somehow that was even worse. The phone rang once, twice. Tommy held his breath, squeezing Buddy the stuffed dog so tight that he was probably crushing the poor toy's insides. What if no one answered? What if he was making a mistake? What if Rick found out he had called someone? All these scary thoughts raced through his 7-year-old mind in the few seconds it took for someone to pick up. 911. What's your emergency? The voice on the other end was calm and kind, like his school nurse when kids got hurt on the playground. It was a woman's voice, and she sounded like she really wanted to help. Tommy's mouth felt dry as cotton. He had practiced saying his address with his teacher, but now all the words seemed jumbled up in his brain. He whispered into the phone. I think my sister's in trouble. Okay, sweetie, I'm here to help you, the lady said gently. Can you tell me your name? Tommy, he whispered back, glancing nervously toward his bedroom door. He could still hear Rick's voice from down the hall, but it was quieter now. Maybe that was good. Maybe it meant whatever was happening had stopped. Hi, Tommy. I'm Lisa, and I'm going to help you and your sister, okay? Can you tell me how old you are? 7, Tommy said, his voice getting a little stronger. Lisa sounded nice, like his grandmother who lived far away but called on his birthday every year. You're very brave for calling me, Tommy. Now can you tell me what kind of trouble your sister is in? Tommy took a deep breath. How could he explain something he didn't really understand himself? She was screaming, he said quietly. Really? Loud screaming like she was scared or hurt, and she was saying no and please don't to my stepdad Rick. Lisa's voice stayed calm, but Tommy could tell she was paying very close attention now. Where's this happening, Tommy? Are you at home? Yes, I'm in my bedroom. Katie and Rick are in his room down the hall. My mom is at work. Tommy felt tears starting to form in his eyes. Katie sounded really scared, and she never gets scared of anything. Okay, Tommy, you're doing great. I need you to tell me your address so I can send some police officers to help you and Katie. Do you know your address? Tommy scrunched up his face, trying to remember. His teacher had made them all practice this. It's 1247 Oak Street. Apartment 3B, he said slowly, making sure he got all the numbers right. Perfect, Tommy. Now, I need to ask you some important questions, okay? Are you somewhere safe right now? Tommy looked around his small bedroom. The door was still slightly open, and he could see the hallway light casting shadows on his wall. I think so. I'm in my room with the door almost closed. Good. Is your mom really not home? No, she's working at the diner. She works at night because they pay more money. Tommy wiped his nose with the back of his hand. She won't be home until really late. And you said Katie is with your stepdad Rick in his room. How old is Katie? She's 12. She's my big sister, and she always takes care of me when Mom is working. Tommy's voice cracked a little. She makes sure I brush my teeth and helps me with homework and stuff. Lisa's voice got even gentler. Tommy, you mentioned that Katie was screaming and saying no to Rick. Is Katie still making noise now? Tommy listened carefully. The apartment had gotten much quieter in the last few minutes. No, I can't hear her anymore. Maybe she's okay. Now? But even as he said it, Tommy didn't really believe it. Something still felt very wrong. Tommy, I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay? Don't hang up. I have police officers coming to help you right now. They're very nice police officers who help kids just like you. Are they going to be mad at me for calling? Tommy asked, suddenly worried. Rick always says kids shouldn't bother police officers unless someone is dying or something. Oh no, honey. You did exactly the right thing, Lisa said firmly. Police officers want kids to call them when they're worried or scared. That's their job. You're being very smart and very brave. Tommy felt a tiny bit better hearing that. But then he heard footsteps in the hallway, and his heart started racing again. Someone's walking around. He whispered into the phone. Okay, Tommy, I need you to be very quiet now. Can you hide somewhere in your room? Maybe in your closet or under your bed? Without hesitation, Tommy slid off his bed and crawled toward his small closet. It was full of clothes and toys and smelled like the lavender detergent his mom used. He squeezed inside, pulling Buddy with him, and tried to close the door as quietly as possible. I'm in my closet, he whispered, so quietly he could barely hear himself. Good job, Tommy. I'm going to stay right here on the phone with you until the police officers get there. They should be at your building very soon. The footsteps in the hallway got closer, and Tommy heard Rick's voice calling out. Katie? Tommy? Is everyone okay out there? Rick's voice sounded different than usual. Not angry, but kind of fake friendly, like when adults are pretending everything is fine when it's not. Tommy held his breath and pressed himself further back into the closet. He clutched the phone close to his ear so he could still hear Lisa talking. Everything's going to be okay, Tommy, Lisa whispered through the phone. The police officers are almost there. You just need to stay hidden and quiet for a few more minutes. But then Tommy heard something that made his blood feel cold. Rick was walking down the hallway, getting closer to Tommy's room. The floorboards creaked with each heavy step. Tommy could see light from the hallway coming under his closet door, and then he saw a shadow pass by his bedroom. Tommy? Rick called out, and his voice was right outside Tommy's room now. You awake, buddy? I thought I heard something. Tommy pressed his hand over his mouth to keep from making any sound. Lisa was still talking quietly through the phone, telling him to stay calm and stay hidden. But Tommy was more scared than he had ever been in his whole life. The bedroom door creaked open wider, and Tommy could see Rick's shadow moving around his room through the crack under the closet door. Please don't look in here, Tommy thought, as hard as he could. Please just go away. Funny, Rick muttered to himself. Could have sworn I heard voices. Tommy closed his eyes tight and tried to make himself as small as possible in the back corner of the closet. Buddy the stuffed dog was squished against his chest, and the phone was pressed so close to his ear that Lisa's gentle voice was the only thing keeping him from crying out loud. Then, like an answer to a prayer, Tommy heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens getting closer and closer to their building. The sirens got louder and louder until they seemed to fill the entire apartment building. Tommy could hear car doors slamming shut outside and heavy footsteps rushing up the stairs to their floor. Still crammed in the back of his closet with Buddy pressed against his chest, he listened as Lisa's calm voice came through the phone. "Tommy, the police officers are here now," she whispered. "They're coming to help you and your sister. You did such a good job calling for help." But before Tommy could respond, everything in the apartment changed in an instant. Rick's voice boomed from the living room, suddenly loud and angry. "Who called the cops? What the hell is going on?" Tommy heard him stomping around, probably, looking out the window at the police cars below. Then came a loud knock on the front door. Not a regular knock like when neighbors visited, but the kind of strong official knocking that meant business. "Police! Open up!" Tommy's heart was beating so fast he thought it might jump right out of his chest. He could hear Rick cursing under his breath and moving around the apartment quickly. Footsteps went back and forth between rooms like Rick was trying to figure out what to do. "Just a minute," Rick called out toward the front door, but his voice sounded fake cheerful again. "Let me just grab a shirt." "Open the door now, sir," came a firm voice from the hallway outside their apartment. It was a man's voice, strong and serious but not mean-sounding. Tommy heard the front door finally open and Rick's voice changed completely. Suddenly he sounded confused and innocent, like he had no idea why police would be at their door. "Officers, I have no clue why you're here," Rick said, and Tommy could tell he was trying really hard to sound normal. "Everything's fine here. Both kids have been asleep for hours." "Sir, we received a 911 call from this address," said the police officer. "We need to check on the children and make sure everyone is safe." "A 911 call? That's impossible," Rick replied, and Tommy could hear him moving around nervously. "Like I said, both kids are sound asleep. Tommy's only 7 and Katie's 12. They wouldn't even know how to call 911. Tommy almost wanted to speak up and tell the police officer that he definitely did know how to call 911, thank you very much. His teacher had made sure all the kids in his class knew exactly what to do in an emergency. But Lisa's voice in his ear reminded him to stay quiet and hidden. "Sir, we still need to see the children and verify that they're safe," said another voice. This one was a woman, and she sounded kind, but also like she wasn't going to take no for an answer. "It's standard procedure when we get calls involving minors." Tommy heard footsteps moving through the apartment. The officers were coming inside, and Rick had no choice but to let them. Of course," Rick was saying, his voice getting more nervous by the second. "Katie's room is right down the hall there, and Tommy's is the next one over." "Tommy," Lisa whispered through the phone, "I think one of the officers is going to come to your room soon. When they do, you can come out of the closet, okay? They're there to help you." Tommy nodded, even though Lisa couldn't see him, then remembered he needed to actually speak. "Okay," he whispered back. The apartment felt different now with the police officers inside. Their voices were calm but serious, and Tommy could tell they were trained to handle situations like this. He heard one of them talking to Rick in the living room while the other officer walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms. "Katie?" the female officer called out gently. "Sweetie, are you awake? I'm Officer Johnson, and I just want to make sure. You're okay?" Tommy heard Katie's bedroom door open, and then there was silence for a moment. Then Officer Johnson's voice again, but this time it sounded different, more urgent. "Danny, I need you back here right now," she called to her partner, and Tommy could tell something was wrong by the tone of her voice. Heavy footsteps hurried down the hallway, and Tommy heard the male officer, Danny, join his partner in Katie's room. Their voices became quieter, but Tommy could tell they were talking quickly and seriously about something they had found. Then Officer Johnson appeared in Tommy's doorway. "Tommy? Sweetheart? Are you in here? I know you're probably scared, but I'm here to help you." Tommy took a deep breath and slowly pushed open the closet door. He peeked out to see a kind-looking woman in a police uniform kneeling down to his level. She had short brown hair and gentle eyes that reminded him of his favorite librarian at school. "Hi there, brave boy," Officer Johnson said softly, Are you Tommy? Tommy nodded and slowly crawled out of the closet, still holding Buddy and the phone. I called 911, he said in a small voice. Katie was screaming. I know you did. And you did exactly the right thing, Officer Johnson said, and Tommy could tell she really meant it. Lisa told me you were very brave and very smart. Can I talk to Lisa for a second? Tommy handed over the phone, and Officer Johnson spoke quietly with the 911 dispatcher for a moment. When she handed it back, Lisa's voice was still there. Tommy, you can hang up the phone now. Officer Johnson is going to take care of you, okay? You were the bravest little boy I've ever talked to. Thank you for helping me. Tommy whispered into the phone before pressing the button to hang up. Officer Johnson sat down on Tommy's bedroom floor, making herself smaller so she wouldn't seem scary. Tommy, I need to ask you some questions about tonight. Is that okay? Tommy nodded, clutching Buddy tighter. You said Katie was screaming. Can you tell me what you heard? Tommy's eyes filled with tears as he remembered. She sounded really scared. She kept saying no and please don't to Rick. Then she screamed really loud like she was hurt or something. It scared me a lot because Katie's never scared of anything. Officer Johnson nodded seriously. You were right to be worried, Tommy. What happened after the screaming stopped? It got quiet, but not good quiet, bad quiet. Then Rick came looking around the apartment, calling our names. That's when I hid in the closet. From down the hall, Tommy could hear more serious talking between Officer Danny and Rick. Rick's voice was getting louder and more defensive, while Officer Danny's stayed calm, but firm. Tommy, Officer Johnson said gently, I need you to stay in your room for a little while, okay? My partner and I need to take care of some things, but you're safe now. Nothing bad is going to happen to you or Katie. Is Katie okay? Tommy asked. The question he'd been afraid to ask since the officers arrived. Officer Johnson's face became very serious. Katie needs some help right now, but she's going to be okay. Some special doctors are coming to make sure she's safe and healthy. Just then, Tommy heard new voices in the apartment. More people were arriving. Paramedics, Tommy realized, because he could hear them talking about medical equipment and asking questions about Katie's condition. The next few minutes felt like a blur. Tommy stayed in his room like Officer Johnson had asked, but he could hear lots of activity throughout the apartment. People were talking in serious professional voices, and there were sounds of equipment being moved around. Tommy sat on his bed, hugging Buddy close while listening to all the activity happening throughout the apartment. Officer Johnson had stayed with him, sitting in the chair from his small desk and speaking quietly into her radio every few minutes. She kept giving him reassuring smiles, but Tommy could tell from her serious expressions between smiles that something really bad had happened. Tommy, Officer Johnson said gently, some more people are going to come talk to you soon. They're special police officers who help kids, and they're really nice. But first, is there someone we can call for you? Maybe your mom at work? Tommy's eyes got wide. He had been so focused on helping Katie that he hadn't even thought about his mom. She's at the Silver Moon Diner on Main Street. She works until 2 in the morning, usually. Officer Johnson nodded and spoke into her radio again, asking someone to contact Tommy's mother immediately. Tommy wondered what his mom would think when she got the call. Would she be scared? Would she think he had done something wrong? From down the hallway, Tommy could hear his sister's voice for the first time since the screaming had stopped. Katie was talking to the paramedics, but her voice sounded different, weak and shaky, not like the strong big sister he knew. It made Tommy's stomach feel funny again, but this time it was more sadness than fear. Is Katie really going to be okay? Tommy asked Officer Johnson for the second time. The doctors are taking very good care of her right now, Officer Johnson replied. She's been through something scary, but she's safe now because of what you did. You saved your sister tonight, Tommy. Before Tommy could ask what she meant by that, more people arrived at the apartment. Tommy could hear new voices, including a woman who introduced herself as Detective Williams. Her voice was kind but serious, like a teacher who really cared about her students but also meant business. Officer Johnson's radio crackled, and Tommy heard a voice say something about evidence and taking pictures. Tommy didn't understand what that meant, but it sounded important. "Tommy," Officer Johnson said, "Detective Williams is going to come talk to you in a few minutes. She's going to ask you some of the same questions I did, but that's okay. Sometimes grown-ups need to hear the story more than once to make sure they understand everything correctly." Tommy nodded. He was getting tired, but he also felt more awake than he had ever been in his life. Everything felt strange and different, like he was living inside a movie or a dream. Detective Williams appeared in his doorway a few minutes later. She was a tall woman with curly hair and kind eyes, wearing regular clothes instead of a police uniform. She smiled at Tommy and sat down on the floor next to his bed, just like Officer Johnson had done earlier. "Hi, Tommy. I'm Detective Williams, but you can call me Detective Amy if that's easier. Officer Johnson told me you were very brave tonight." "I just called 911 like my teacher taught us," Tommy said quietly. "That was exactly the right thing to do," Detective Amy said. "Tommy, I need to ask you some questions about your stepdad, Rick. Has he ever done anything that made you feel uncomfortable or scared before tonight?" Tommy thought about it carefully. "Not really scared, but—" He paused, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes he looks at Katie in a way that makes me feel weird, and sometimes he asks her to come to his room to help him with things, but then they're in there for a really long time just talking." Detective Amy nodded, writing something down in a small notebook. "Has Katie ever seemed upset or different after spending time with Rick?" "Yeah," Tommy said, remembering. "Sometimes she comes out of his room and goes straight to the bathroom to take a shower, even if she just took one earlier. And sometimes she seems really quiet and sad after. But when I ask her what's wrong, she just says she's tired." As Tommy talked, he started remembering more things that had seemed strange but that he hadn't really understood before. Like how Katie had started wearing bigger, looser clothes lately, even though she used to like her pretty dresses. Or how she sometimes flinched when Rick tried to give her hugs, but she never flinched when their mom hugged her. "Tommy, you're being very helpful," Detective Amy said. "One more question. Has Rick ever told you or Katie not to tell your mom about things that happen when she's not home?" Tommy's eyes got wide. "Yeah. He always says that Mom works really hard and we shouldn't bother her with little things. He says some things should just stay between family members who live in the house." Detective Amy and Officer Johnson exchanged a look that Tommy didn't understand, but he could tell it was important. From the living room, Tommy could hear Rick's voice getting louder and more upset. He was talking to Officer Danny and some other people who had arrived, and he kept saying things like, "This is ridiculous and you're making a big mistake." But his voice sounded scared now, not just angry. "Tommy," Detective Amy said, "we found some things in Rick's room that show he was hurting Katie in ways that were very wrong. Do you understand what I mean?" Tommy wasn't sure he did understand, completely, but he nodded anyway. He knew that hurting people was wrong, and he knew that making Katie scream and cry was definitely wrong. "The good news is that Rick is never going to be able to hurt Katie again," Detective Amy continued. "We're going to make sure of that, and you're both going to be safe from now on." Just then, Tommy heard his mom's voice coming from the front door. She sounded panicked and out of breath, like she had run all the way from the diner. "Where are my kids? Are they okay?" "What happened?" his mom was saying, and Tommy could tell she was crying. "Mom!" Tommy called out, jumping off his bed and running toward the living room before Officer Johnson could stop him. His mom scooped him up in the biggest hug he had ever gotten, and she smelled like coffee and pie from the diner. She was crying and laughing at the same time, checking him all over to make sure he wasn't hurt. "Tommy, baby, are you okay?" "The police called and said there was an emergency, but they wouldn't tell me what happened over the phone." Tommy looked around the living room and saw more people than he had expected. There were several police officers, Detective Amy, some people in regular clothes who looked official, and paramedics getting ready to take Katie somewhere. Rick was sitting on the couch with his hands behind his back, and Tommy realized he was wearing handcuffs. "Mom," Tommy said, his voice getting stronger now that she was there. "Rick was hurting Katie. I heard her screaming and I called 911 just like my teacher taught me." His mom's face went through about 10 different emotions all at once. She looked shocked, then angry, then scared, then proud, all in the space of a few seconds. "You called 911?" she asked, kneeling down to look Tommy in the eyes. "I was scared for Katie," Tommy explained. "She was screaming really loud and saying no and please don't, and it didn't sound like regular sister stuff. It sounded like she was really hurt or scared." His mom hugged him again, even tighter this time. "You did exactly the right thing, sweetheart. You saved your sister." As the paramedics wheeled Katie past them on a stretcher, she reached out her hand toward Tommy. Her face was pale and she looked tired, but she managed to smile at her little brother. "Thank you, Tommy," she whispered. "You're my hero." 3 weeks had passed since that terrible night, and Tommy was sitting in his new bedroom at his grandmother's house, playing with his toy cars on the soft carpet. The room was bigger than his old one, with windows that let in lots of sunshine, and walls painted a cheerful blue color that his grandma had let him pick out himself. Buddy the stuffed dog sat on the new bed, looking much happier in their safe new home. Life had changed completely for Tommy and his family. After that night when the police came, everything happened very quickly. Katie had to stay in the hospital for a few days while doctors made sure she was okay, and Tommy and his mom stayed in a hotel room that smelled like cleaning supplies and had scratchy blankets. But even the uncomfortable hotel felt safer than their old apartment. Tommy's mom had quit her job at the diner the very next day. She spent hours on the phone with lawyers and police officers and social workers, using words that Tommy didn't always understand, but that sounded important. Words like investigation and protection and justice. Sometimes she cried during these phone calls, but when Tommy asked if she was sad, she told him they were good tears, the kind people cry when something scary is over and everyone is safe. Detective Amy had visited them several times at the hotel, always bringing coloring books and small toys for Tommy. She explained that Rick had been arrested and would be going to jail for a very long time. She also told them that when police searched Rick's room more carefully, they found things that proved he had been planning to hurt Katie for months. Tommy didn't understand all the details, but he understood that his phone call had stopped something even worse from happening. "You know what, Tommy?" Detective Amy had said during one of her visits. "We found out that Rick was part of a group of bad people who hurt children. Because you were brave enough to call for help, we were able to catch not just Rick, but some of his friends too. You helped save other kids you don't even know." Tommy had felt proud and sad at the same time when she told him that. Proud because he had helped people, but sad because there were other kids who had been scared and hurt too. The move to Grandma's house had been like starting a whole new life. Grandma lived in a small town about 2 hours away from their old apartment, where the air smelled cleaner and there were actual yards with grass instead of just concrete everywhere. She had a little white house with a front porch and a garden where she grew tomatoes and flowers that attracted colorful butterflies. Katie was different now, but she was getting better every day. At first, she had been very quiet and stayed in her room a lot, talking to a special doctor who helped kids work through scary experiences. Tommy had been worried that his big sister might never be the same again. But slowly, little pieces of the old Katie started coming back. Last week, she had helped Tommy with his math homework for the first time since they moved in. Yesterday, she had actually laughed at one of his silly jokes during dinner. And this morning, she had asked if he wanted to help her plant some new flowers in Grandma's garden. These small moments felt like the best presents Tommy had ever gotten. Tommy's mom was different too, but in good ways. She smiled more now, even though she also cried sometimes when she thought Tommy wasn't looking. She had found a new job at a doctor's office in town, working during the day instead of at night. This meant she was home for dinner every evening, and could read Tommy bedtime stories again, just like she used to when he was smaller. The new school was strange at first, but Tommy's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was kind and patient. She knew about what had happened to Tommy's family, and she made sure the other kids included him in games at recess. Tommy had even made a new friend named Jake, who lived just down the street and had a dog named Pepper, who loved to play fetch. One afternoon, while Tommy was building a fort out of couch cushions in Grandma's living room, Detective Amy came for another visit. But this time she brought someone special with her, a man in a police uniform who had a big smile and carried a shiny badge. "Tommy," Detective Amy said, "I'd like you to meet Chief Peterson. He's the boss of all the police officers in the city, where you used to live. Chief Peterson sat down on the floor next to Tommy's cushion fort, which made Tommy giggle because it looked funny to see a grown-up police chief sitting on the carpet. "Tommy," Chief Peterson said, "I came here today because I wanted to thank you personally for what you did that night. Your brave phone call didn't just save your sister. It helped us solve a very big case and protect many other children." Tommy felt his cheeks get warm. He wasn't used to so many grown-ups telling him he was brave and important. "We want to give you something special," Chief Peterson continued, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside was a shiny medal that said, "Junior Hero," and had Tommy's name engraved on it. "This is to remind you that you should always trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right, and you should never be afraid to ask for help." Tommy held the medal carefully, running his fingers over the smooth metal. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever owned, even prettier than his favorite toy cars. But the best part of that day came later, when Katie knocked on his bedroom door and asked if she could come in. She sat on his new bed and looked at the medal for a long time. "Tommy," she said quietly, "I never got to really thank you for what you did. You saved my life that night." Tommy looked at his big sister, who seemed stronger now than she had in weeks. "I was just scared for you," he said simply. "You always take care of me, so I wanted to take care of you too." Katie's eyes filled with tears, but they were the good kind like Mom's had been. "I'm going to get better, you know. The doctor says it takes time, but I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to make sure that other kids know they can be brave like you were." "What do you mean?" Tommy asked. "I want to talk to kids at schools and tell them about being safe and asking for help when something feels wrong. Just like your teacher taught you about calling 911. Maybe if more kids know what to do, fewer bad things will happen." Tommy thought that sounded like a really good idea. His teacher had been right. Knowing how to call for help had been the most important thing he ever learned. That night, as Tommy's mom tucked him into his new bed, she sat on the edge and smoothed his hair like she used to when he was little. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she said softly. "You did something that even some grown-ups would have been too scared to do. You trusted your heart when it told you something was wrong, and you took action to protect someone you love." Tommy hugged Buddy tight and looked around his safe, cheerful room. Through the window, he could see fireflies starting to blink in Grandma's garden, and he could hear Katie and Grandma laughing together in the kitchen downstairs. "Mom," Tommy said sleepily, "I'm glad we live here now." "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." As his mom turned off the light and closed the door, Tommy smiled in the darkness. He was still just 7 years old, but he had learned something important that would stay with him forever. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is make a phone call when someone needs help.